The iron wheels screamed against the rails as the locomotive slowed, belching black smoke into the endless Texas sky. Clara Bennett pressed her face against the grimy window, watching the town of Cedar Ridge materialize from the dusty horizon. Her fingers trembled as they found the letter tucked deep in her coat pocket, the letter that had sealed her fate with lies. 25 years old, she had written in careful script, experienced in household management, seeking honest work and companionship. The words tasted bitter now, even in memory. She was barely 19, had never managed anything larger than her late mother's vegetable garden, and the only honest thing about her application was her desperate need for a home. The train lurched to a stop with a final, mournful whistle. Clara gathered her worn carpet bag, everything she owned compressed into its fraying corners, and stepped onto the platform. The August heat struck her like an open oven door, so different from the humid suffocation of Louisiana. Here, the air was dry as old bones, carrying the scent of cattle and distant rain that might never come. She stood among the dispersing passengers, searching the sparse crowd for the man who had chosen her from a catalog of lies. Jedediah Brooks. His letters had been signed in a firm, economical hand. Age 42, widower, owner of the Double B Ranch, seeking companionate marriage with mature woman of good character. Miss Bennett. The voice came from behind her, low and weathered as old leather. Clara turned, her rehearsed smile faltering. The man before her was nothing like the romantic figures from the dime novels she'd hidden beneath her pillow back home. Jedediah Brooks stood tall but worn, like a fence post that had weathered too many storms. His face was all sharp angles, cheekbones that could cut glass, a jaw set in permanent determination. Gray threaded through his dark hair and beard, and his eyes were the color of winter sky, cold and assessing. He didn't smile, didn't offer his hand, just stood there, taking her measure with those pale eyes that seemed to see straight through her careful composure. "Mr. Brooks," Clara managed, her voice smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat, tried again with more authority, the voice of a 25-year-old woman, not a frightened girl. "Yes, I'm Clara Bennett." His gaze traveled from her face to her thin shoulders, down to her worn boots, and back up again. Something flickered in his expression. Doubt, perhaps, or disappointment. Clara forced her spine straighter, lifted her chin. She'd practiced this moment 100 times on the long journey from Louisiana, but under his scrutiny, all her rehearsed confidence evaporated like morning dew. "You're smaller than I expected," he said finally. Not unkind, just observational, like noting the color of the sky. "The journey was long," Clara replied, hating how defensive she sounded. "I'm stronger than I look." It wasn't agreement or disagreement, just acknowledgement. He reached for her carpet bag without asking, his movements efficient and impersonal. "Wagons this way. We'll need to make good time if we want to reach the ranch before dark." Clara followed him through the dusty street, past the general store with its faded sign, past the saloon where men congregated in the shade, bottles glinting in their hands. A few women in calico dresses paused their errands to stare. She could feel their eyes measuring her, wondering about the mail-order bride who'd come to fill a dead woman's shoes. The wagon waited at the edge of town, practical and unadorned like its owner. 2 sturdy horses stood patient in the heat, tails swishing at flies. Jedediah stowed her bag in the back with surprising gentleness, then turned to help her up. His hands were large, calloused, and carefully impersonal as they steadied her climb. "It's a 4-hour ride," he said, settling onto the bench beside her. "There's water in the canteen if you need it." "Thank you." Clara arranged her skirts, acutely aware of the space between them, close enough to be proper for a betrothed couple, far enough to be strangers. Which, she supposed, they were. The wagon lurched forward, and Cedar Ridge began to fall away behind them. The landscape opened up like a vast brown ocean, waves of grass rippling in the hot wind. Clara had never seen so much emptiness, so much sky. It made her feel small as a dust mote, insignificant as the lies she carried. They rode in silence for the first hour, Jedediah handled the reins with the same economy of movement she'd noticed before, his profile carved sharp against the endless horizon. Clara stole glances when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to reconcile this taciturn stranger with the man who'd written those letters. Brief missives, yes, but with hints of loneliness between the lines. "Your letter mentioned you're from Louisiana," he said suddenly, making her jump. "Yes, near Baton Rouge. Truth, at least, in this small thing. What made you leave?" Clara had prepared for this question. "My parents passed last winter. Fever. There was nothing left for me there." More truth, though she left out how young she'd been when they died, how the neighbors had tried to marry her off to their drunkard son, how she'd fled with her mother's wedding dress and her father's watch, both now sold for train fare. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words were formal, but something in his tone suggested he understood the weight of grief. "Your letter mentioned you're widowed," Clara ventured, then worried she'd overstepped. 3 years now." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. Clara's dress clung to her back with sweat, and she gratefully accepted the canteen when Jedediah offered it. The water was warm, but clean, and she was careful to take small sips like a lady, not gulp like the thirsty girl she was. "There," Jedediah said eventually, pointing to a distant cluster of buildings. "That's the Double B." Clara squinted through the shimmering heat. She could make out a main house, a barn, what might be a bunkhouse. It looked lonely as an island in that sea of grass, but solid too, like it had grown from the earth itself. "It's not much," Jedediah continued, and for the first time, she heard something like uncertainty in his voice. "Not what ladies from Louisiana might be used to." "I'm not looking for much," Clara said, and meant it. "Just a home, a place to belong." He glanced at her then, those winter eyes warming just a fraction. "That's what I'm offering. Nothing more, nothing less." As they drew closer, Clara could see the house more clearly. 2 stories of weathered wood, a broad porch wrapped around the front, glass windows that caught the light. It was bigger than anywhere she'd lived, sturdy and masculine and austere. A few scraggly flowers struggled in boxes beneath the windows. Remnants, she guessed, of the woman who'd come before. An old man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, weathered as saddle leather, with suspicious eyes under bristling brows. He studied Clara like she might be a horse with hidden lameness. "Samuel," Jedediah said by way of introduction. "This is Miss Bennett. Clara, Samuel's been with the Double B longer than I have. He helps run the place." Samuel grunted something that might have been a greeting. "She's young," he observed, not bothering to lower his voice. "She's standing right here," Clara said before she could stop herself, then bit her lip. But Jedediah made a sound that might have been almost laughter. "That she is," he agreed. "Samuel, help me with the horses. Miss Bennett, you can go on inside. Doors open. Pick any room upstairs for yourself except the one at the end of the hall." Clara climbed down from the wagon, legs stiff from the long ride. The house loomed before her, full of shadows and secrets and the ghost of another woman's life. She squared her shoulders and walked up the porch steps, each board creaking a welcome or warning. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and something else, emptiness, perhaps. The parlor was sparse but clean, a man's attempt at maintaining order. A daguerreotype on the mantel showed a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Clara looked away quickly, feeling like an intruder. She climbed the stairs, running her hand along the smooth banister. 4 doors lined the upper hallway. She opened the first 3, finding similar rooms, simple furnishings, rag rugs on the floors, windows overlooking the endless grass. The 4th door, at the end of the hall, remained closed. His room, she understood, or theirs, once. Now his alone, and forbidden to her. She chose the room farthest from that closed door, setting her carpetbag on the narrow bed. From the window, she could see Jedediah and Samuel unhitching the horses, their movements synchronized by years of shared work. Her intended, strange word, strange thought, moved with deliberate purpose, never emotion wasted. 19 years old, playing at being 25, the weight of her deception pressed down like the Texas heat. What would this hard, quiet man do when he discovered her lie? Send her back? Cast her out into that endless grass sea? Clara unpinned her hat, seeing her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Did she look 25? She'd thought so, back in Louisiana, painting her lips carefully, pinning her hair up in what she imagined was a mature style. But now, in this spare room in this lonely house, she saw what Jedediah must see. A girl's face trying to wear a woman's expression. From downstairs came the sound of boots on wood, the low rumble of masculine voices. Soon, she'd have to go down, begin the charade of being the experienced housekeeper she'd claimed to be. She'd have to cook supper for this stranger who would be her husband, pretend she knew about managing a household this size, hide the tremor in her hands and the youth in her voice. Clara closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool window glass. There was no going back now. The train had carried her away from Louisiana, away from her girlhood, into this vast and terrifying new world. All she had were her lies and her determination not to be sent back. When she opened her eyes, Jedediah was looking up at her window. Their gazes met across the distance, and Clara felt exposed, as if he could see straight through the glass and walls and fabric to the frightened child beneath. Then he touched the brim of his hat, a small gesture, oddly courteous, and turned back to his work. Clara stepped away from the window, squaring her shoulders once more. Time to go downstairs, time to begin becoming the woman she'd pretended to be. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the endless grassland in shades of gold and shadow. Her first day in Texas was nearly done, but her deception had only just begun. The rooster's crow pierced through Clara's dreams, dragging her from blessed unconsciousness into the harsh reality of her second day at the Double B Ranch. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching for the familiar comfort of her mother's quilt. Instead, her fingers found rough wool and the strange angles of an unfamiliar room. Texas, the ranch, the lies. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her fingers fumbling with buttons and pins. The house was silent as a held breath. But she knew ranch life started early. If she was to play the part of an experienced housekeeper, she needed to have breakfast ready before the men stirred. The kitchen was a foreign territory of cast iron and mystery. Clara stood in the doorway, surveying the massive stove that squatted against one wall like a black metal beast. Back home, their stove had been half this size, and even then, her mother had done most of the cooking while Clara merely helped. 25 years old, experienced in household management. The words mocked her as she approached the stove, lifting the heavy iron plate to peer inside. Cold ashes greeted her. Of course, the fire had to be built first. She knew that much, at least. By the time footsteps sounded on the stairs, Clara had managed to get a fire going, though it had taken 3 attempts and left her with soot on her cheek. She was stirring something that might charitably be called porridge when Jedediah appeared in the doorway. He paused, taking in the scene, the smoke wisping from the poorly managed stove, the scatter of spilled oats on the floor, the way Clara gripped the wooden spoon like a weapon against her own incompetence. "Morning," he said simply, moving to the coffee pot. He checked inside, found it empty, and set about making coffee with the efficient movements of long practice. "I was just about to—" Clara started, but he waved her words away. "Coffee first, always coffee first." He showed her how much water to use, how many scoops of grounds, where to set the pot on the stove for the best heat. His hands were patient, methodical. Teacher's hands, though she doubted he saw himself that way. They worked in relative silence, Clara following his lead as he showed her where things were kept. The everyday dishes here, the good china there, preserves in the pantry, salt pork in the barrel. When Samuel appeared, drawn by the coffee smell, He grunted something that might have been approval at the dark brew. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The porridge was lumpy. The biscuits Clara attempted were more like rocks, but the men ate without complaint. She noticed they filled up mostly on the bread and preserves already in the pantry. Someone else's handiwork, probably laid by for occasions just like this. "I'll do better tomorrow," Clara said, hating the defensive note in her voice. Jedediah looked up from his plate. "Takes time to learn a new kitchen," he said, neutral as always. Then, after a pause, "Martha used to burn everything the first month we were married. Learned, though, she learned. Martha." The name hung in the air like morning mist, there and gone. Clara saw Samuel's jaw tighten, saw the way Jedediah's fingers stilled on his coffee cup. The ghost at the table, more present in her absence than Clara in her clumsy flesh and blood. After breakfast, the men went out to tend the stock, leaving Clara alone with the mess and her mounting anxiety. She cleared the table, washed dishes in water she had to haul from the pump outside, swept the floors. Everything took twice as long as it should have. Her hands, soft from a life of easier work, began to redden and crack. By midday, she had a stew of sorts bubbling on the stove, mostly vegetables and salt pork, seasoned by guesswork and prayer. She was peeling potatoes when a shadow fell across the kitchen door. "You're holding the knife wrong." Samuel stood there, looking even more grizzled in the harsh afternoon light. Clara's first instinct was to bristle, but something in his stance, not quite kindness, but not cruelty either, made her pause. "Show me?" He stomped in, took the knife from her hand. "Like this. Let the blade do the work. You're trying to muscle through it." His demonstrations were brusque but clear. Martha had to learn too. City girl from back east. Didn't know a potato from a turnip when she first came. Was she a good cook? Eventually? Samuel's face softened just a fraction. "Best biscuits in 3 counties. Jed would ride 20 miles just to be home for Sunday supper." He handed the knife back. "You'll learn, if you mean to stay." That "if" hung between them, sharp as the blade in her hand. Clara returned to the potatoes, using the technique Samuel had shown her. He watched for a moment, nodded, then stumped back outside. The afternoon stretched long and lonely. Clara explored the house as she cleaned, learning its rhythms and secrets. The parlor with its daguerreotype shrine, a small study where ledgers lined the shelves. Jedediah's careful handwriting tracking cattle and seasons. The closed door at the end of the upstairs hall, which she didn't dare approach. She found Martha everywhere and nowhere, in the pattern of the dishes, chosen by another woman's taste, in the arrangement of the furniture, placed for another woman's comfort, in the garden visible through the kitchen window, now mostly gone to seed but showing signs of once careful tending. Who was she? This Martha who burned biscuits but learned to make the best in 3 counties, who chose cheerful yellow curtains for the kitchen but left the parlor so plain, who was mourned in silence by these taciturn men. Dinner was a modest improvement over breakfast. The stew was edible, the cornbread merely heavy instead of inedible. Clara served the meal with hands that barely trembled, managing to present it as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. "Not bad," Jedediah offered, which from him seemed high praise. They ate as the sun slanted through the windows, painting everything golden. Clara was beginning to learn the rhythm of ranch meals, purposeful, fuel for the hard work, with little conversation. So different from the chattering dinners of her childhood, her mother's gentle gossip, her father's stories. After dinner, while Clara cleaned up, she heard the rumble of masculine voices from the porch. Through the window, she could see Jedediah and Samuel sitting on the steps, smoking pipes in the cooling evening air. Their words were too low to catch, but the tone was comfortable. Decades of friendship in those quiet exchanges. She was an intruder here. The thought struck her with sudden force. This was a world complete in itself. These 2 men and their shared grief and their efficient rhythms. What need did they have for a lying girl playing at being a woman? Night fell like a curtain dropping. Clara finished her chores by lamplight. aware of every sound in the strange house. Somewhere, coyotes called to each other across the darkness. The wind made the walls creak and settle. Everything felt vast and wild and barely contained by walls and windows. She was heading upstairs, exhausted to her bones. When Jedediah called her name, he stood in the study doorway, ledger in hand. "Can you read? Write?" "Yes, of course." At least this wasn't a lie. He gestured her inside. The study was small, dominated by a desk and the smell of leather and tobacco. "Part of running a ranch is keeping the books. Martha used to help with this." He opened the ledger, showing neat columns of figures. Cattle bought and sold, supplies, wages for the hands when we hire them for roundup. "Think you could learn it?" Clara leaned over the ledger, studying the entries. It was more complex than household accounts, but the principle was the same. "I believe so, yes." "Good. We'll start tomorrow evening, after supper." He closed the ledger, then studied her in that direct way he had. "You did fine today." "I burned the biscuits." "The stew was barely seasoned." You worked hard. That matters more than perfect biscuits." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "This isn't an easy life, Martha." She came from easier circumstances. Took her time to adjust. "I'm not expecting miracles." Clara felt tears threaten, born of exhaustion and relief and guilt. Here he was, being kind about her incompetence, and all the while she was deceiving him about the most basic facts of her existence. "Thank you," she managed. "Get some rest. Tomorrow comes early on a ranch." Clara climbed the stairs on legs that felt like lead. In her room, she sat on the bed and unlaced her boots, wincing at the blisters forming on her heels. Her hands were red and raw. Her back ached, and she smelled of smoke and sweat and failure. 25 years old, experienced housekeeper. The lies sat like stones in her stomach. Through her window, she could see a light burning in the barn. Jedediah, probably, checking on the horses one last time. He was a good man. She was beginning to understand. Quiet, grieving, but good. He deserved better than a child's deception. But what choice did she have? Where else could she go? Back to Louisiana? To marry the drunkard? To become what desperate young women without family became? Clara changed into her nightgown, one of only 2 she owned, and knelt by the bed. She tried to pray, but the words tangled in her throat. How could she ask for blessing on an endeavor built on lies? How could she ask for help succeeding in her deception? Instead, she climbed into bed and lay listening to the night sounds of her new home, the house settling, wind in the grass, something, Samuel, moving around downstairs, checking locks, banking fires. Tomorrow, she would try again. She would rise before the rooster and light the stove properly. She would make better biscuits, stronger coffee. She would learn the ledgers and prove herself useful beyond the kitchen. She would earn her place here through work, if not through honesty. She would become what she had pretended to be, even if the becoming killed her. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was the distant sound of horses, restless in their stalls. Even they belonged here more than she did, but belonging, she was learning, might be something earned rather than claimed. One burned biscuit, one blistered hand, one small truth at a time. The moon rose over the Double B Ranch, painting everything in silver and shadow. In her narrow bed, Clara Bennett, 19 and terrified and determined, began the slow transformation into whoever she would need to become to survive. The morning Clara discovered her fear of horses might have been comical if it hadn't been so mortifying. She'd been carrying slop to the pigs when Jedediah led a mare past the pen. The horse, mild-mannered Buttercup, as she'd later learn, merely snorted. But Clara shrieked and dropped the bucket, sending kitchen scraps flying across her skirts. Samuel, repairing a fence nearby, actually barked a laugh. "Lord Almighty, girl, she's gentler than a lamb." Jedediah steadied the mare, his expression unreadable. "You didn't mention being afraid of horses in your letters." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. What experienced ranch woman would fear horses? It's just been a while since I've been around them. Another lie to add to her collection. Can't run a ranch being afraid of horses, Samuel muttered, going back to his fence work. That evening, while Clara struggled with supper, the beans were crunchy, the cornbread flat as a pancake. She felt the weight of Jedediah's contemplation. He ate methodically, occasionally glancing at her with those winter sky eyes that seemed to catalog every mistake, every fumble, every obviously youthful gesture she couldn't quite suppress. "How old did you say you were?" he asked suddenly, making her nearly drop her fork. 25. The lie came automatically now, though it tasted more bitter each time. He returned to his beans, but Clara felt the doubt radiating from him like heat from the stove. Later, as she washed dishes, she heard him tell Samuel, "She's young, younger than her letters suggested." "Noticed that myself," Samuel replied. "Way she moves, way she startles, more like a girl than a woman grown." Clara's hand stilled in the soapy water. Were they going to send her away? The thought made her stomach clench with fresh panic. Where would she go? What would she do? The next few days brought a cascade of small disasters that chipped away at her carefully constructed facade. She confused salt for sugar in the morning coffee, earning a spectacular spit take from Samuel. She hung Jedediah's work shirts to dry without wringing them properly, so they froze solid as boards on the line. During her first attempt at bread making, she forgot the yeast entirely, producing what Samuel dubbed adobe bricks, but less useful. But it was during Sunday dinner that her youth truly betrayed her. They had a visitor, Thomas Morrison from the neighboring ranch, come to discuss sharing water rights through the dry season. A man in his 50s with kind eyes and a grandfatherly manner. He engaged Clara in conversation while she served the meal. "So, you're from Louisiana," he said warmly. "I traveled through there. Oh, must have been 15 years ago. Beautiful country. You ever see the grand parade in New Orleans for President Pierce's inauguration?" Clara's mind went blank. President Pierce? When was that? She would have been barely walking, certainly not old enough to remember parades. We lived quite far from New Orleans." "Ah, but surely you heard about the yellow fever outbreak of '53. Terrible thing. Lost some friends in that one." She would have been 4 years old. Clara fumbled with the serving spoon, her mind racing. "Yes, terrible, though we were fortunate to be spared." Thomas nodded sympathetically, but she caught him exchanging a glance with Jedediah, the kind of look that said volumes without words. After Thomas left, Jedediah found her scrubbing the kitchen floor with desperate energy, as if she could scour away her mistakes along with the dirt. "You don't have to attack it like it's done you personal wrong," he observed from the doorway. Clara sat back on her heels, pushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I want to do things properly. Takes time to learn." He moved into the kitchen, settling into a chair with the peculiar grace big men sometimes possess. "That story Thomas told, about the fever. You would have been quite young when that happened." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "I have a good memory. Must have, to remember being 4 years old so clearly." The words hung between them like a challenge. Clara met his gaze, trying to summon the authority of the 25-year-old woman she claimed to be, but under his steady regard, she felt every one of her 19 years. "Perhaps I misremembered the date," she said weakly. "Perhaps." He stood, the conversation apparently over, but paused at the door. "Clara, whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from, I need honesty between us if this is going to work." After he left, Clara remained on the floor, surrounded by soapsuds and shame. He knew, maybe not the exact truth, but he knew she was lying. Yet he hadn't sent her away. Not yet. The next morning brought fresh humiliation. Determined to prove her worth, Clara decided to gather eggs from the henhouse alone. How hard could it be? She'd watched Samuel do it. Just reach under the hens and collect the eggs. She hadn't counted on the hens having opinions about this process. The first hen pecked her hand hard enough to draw blood. Clara yelped and jerked back, knocking into the roost behind her. This startled the entire coop into a frenzy of squawking and flapping. In the chaos, Clara tripped over a feed bucket, landing hard in the straw and chicken droppings. That's how Jedediah found her, sprawled on the henhouse floor, covered in feathers, and worse, nursing a bloody hand while hens scolded from their perches. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and Clara braced for mockery or dismissal. Instead, he offered his hand to help her up. "First rule of egg gathering," he said, pulling her to her feet. "Move slow and talk soft. Hens are nervous creatures." He showed her then, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he demonstrated the proper approach. "Like this, slide your hand underneath, gentle-like. Some folks sing to them." Sing. Martha used to hum hymns, said it calmed them. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his late wife, but he continued, "Never could carry a tune myself." Clara watched him work, efficient and calm. "I'm sorry I'm so useless at this." "You're not useless. You're learning." He handed her a warm egg. "Try again." This time, with his guidance. She managed to collect 3 eggs without injury. It felt like a major victory. That evening, as had become their routine, Jedediah called her into the study for bookkeeping lessons. Clara had taken to this more readily than the domestic chores. Numbers were logical, orderly, unlike temperamental stoves and aggressive hens. "You're quick with figures," he noted, watching her tally a column of expenses. "My father was a clerk," she said, then caught herself. Too much truth could be as dangerous as lies. "Before he took ill." "What kind of clerk?" "General store. I helped sometimes." This was true. At least, she had helped her father in his final months, when his hands shook too much to hold the pen steady. They worked in companionable silence, the scratch of pens and rustle of pages filling the small room. Outside, night pressed against the windows, vast and dark. "I've been thinking," Jedediah said suddenly, "about the wedding." Clara's pen stilled. They'd barely discussed it since her arrival, the eventual ceremony that would transform their arrangement from theoretical to binding. "The circuit preacher comes through next month," he continued. "That would give you time to settle in. Be sure this is what you want." What she wanted. As if she had choices beyond this ranch, this deception, this patient man who saw through her lies but hadn't cast her out. "That sounds sensible," she managed. "Clara." He set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "I'm not a fool. I know you're younger than you claimed. I know you're running from something. But I also see you trying, working hard. That matters to me more than other things." Clara felt tears threaten. His kindness was harder to bear than anger would have been. "I didn't mean to deceive. We all do what we must to survive." His voice was gentle but firm. "I'm offering you a home, a life here. But I need to know, can you commit to this? Not to the woman you pretended to be in your letters, but to becoming the woman this ranch needs." The question hung in the air like dust motes in lamplight. Clara thought of her blistered hands, her aching back, the 1,000 small failures of the past week. Then she thought of the alternative, going back, giving up, admitting defeat. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I can commit to that." "All right, then." He returned to his ledger as if they discussed nothing more momentous than cattle prices. "We'll speak to the preacher when he comes." That night, Clara lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Through her window, she could see stars scattered like spilled salt across the sky. So many stars, more than she'd ever seen in Louisiana. She thought about truth and lies, about the girl she'd been and the woman she was trying to become. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Ornery hens, mysterious kitchen implements, the constant weight of Samuel's skeptical gaze, but also Jedediah's patient instruction, small victories, the slow accumulation of skills that might someday make her worthy of this place. She was failing at being 25, but perhaps she could succeed at being herself, just Clara, learning one difficult lesson at a time, earning her place through persistence rather than pretense. The moon rose full and bright, silvering the grasslands that stretched endlessly beyond her window. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, wild and free. Clara pulled her blanket higher and closed her eyes, ready to face another day of becoming. The news of Jedediah Brooks's upcoming marriage spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire in drought season. Clara first became aware of the town's scrutiny during her initial trip to Mulligan's General Store. 3 weeks after her arrival at the Double B, she'd driven the wagon herself, a small victory after days of Jedediah's patient instruction. Her hands were steady on the reins, though her heart still raced whenever the horses snorted or tossed their heads. Samuel had grudgingly admitted she didn't drive half bad for a greenhorn, which from him was practically a declaration of excellence. The store was busy for a Tuesday morning. Clara recognized the immediate shift in atmosphere when she entered, conversations pausing mid-sentence, eyes tracking her movement between the shelves. She kept her chin high, focusing on her list. Flour, coffee, salt, thread. You must be Miss Bennett. The speaker was a woman in her 40s, wearing a dress of fine purple wool that marked her as prosperous. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm Mrs. Adelaide Morrison. My husband Thomas visited the Double B last week. Pleased to meet you, Clara managed, aware of other women drawing closer like sharks scenting blood in water. Such a surprise when we heard Jedediah was taking another wife. Mrs. Morrison continued. We all thought, well, after Martha, we assumed he'd remain a widower. They were so devoted, you know. Yes, I've heard she was a wonderful woman. Clara kept her voice steady. Neutral. Oh, she was an angel, so accomplished, so mature. She had such a way with the ranch accounts, and her needlework. Why, she made that altar cloth at the church with her own hands. Mrs. Morrison's gaze swept over Clara's simple calico dress, clearly finding it wanting. Of course, she was properly aged when they married. 32, if I recall, a woman of experience. The implied comparison hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to continue shopping, adding items to her basket with hands that barely trembled. And you're from Louisiana? Another woman, younger, with curious eyes, had joined them. However did you meet Mr. Brooks? Through correspondence. Clara said simply, a mail-order arrangement. Mrs. Morrison's tone made it sound sordid, something shameful. How modern, though I suppose Jedediah had limited options. At his age, 42 and set in his ways, not easy for a young woman to adjust to. I'm 25, Clara said, the lie automatic but sounding hollow even to her own ears, quite capable of managing a household. The women exchanged glances that said they didn't believe a word of it. Of course, dear. Mrs. Morrison patted Clara's arm with condescending kindness. Though you do have such a youthful appearance. Why, you could pass for a girl barely out of the schoolroom. Clara escaped as quickly as she could, loading her purchases with shaking hands. But as she climbed onto the wagon seat, she heard Mrs. Morrison's carrying voice through the store's open door. Barely more than a child, if you ask me. What is Jedediah thinking? A man his age with a girl like that. It's not seemly. The drive back to the ranch blurred with unshed tears. Clara had known there would be talk, but the reality of it, the cutting remarks disguised as concern, the comparisons to the sainted Martha, cut deeper than expected. She was unloading the wagon when Jedediah appeared, immediately noting her distress. Trouble in town? No trouble. Clara hefted a flour sack, avoiding his eyes. Met Mrs. Morrison. She was informative about Martha's many accomplishments. His jaw tightened. Adelaide Morrison has opinions about everything and sense about nothing. Don't let her poison your day. But the poison had already spread. That evening, as Clara served a supper of stew that was actually quite decent, she found herself studying Jedediah across the table. 42 to her 19, though he believed her to be 25. Still a significant gap. Did people see something improper in their arrangement? Something she was too naive to recognize? The next Sunday brought fresh humiliation. Jedediah insisted they attend church together. Might as well give them something to talk about directly, he'd said with grim humor. Clara wore her best dress, a blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and pinned her hair in what she hoped was a sophisticated style. But the moment they entered the small chapel, she felt the weight of dozens of stares. The whispers started before they even found their seats. "Look how young she is. Poor thing, probably doesn't know what she's gotten herself into." Jedediah must be desperate to take a child bride. That phrase, child bride, followed her through the service. Reverend Dawson, a kind-faced man with silver hair, preached about patience and understanding. But Clara barely heard him. She was too aware of the women studying her, the men glancing between her and Jedediah with knowing looks. After the service, as people gathered outside, a widow named Mrs. Catherine Hartley approached. She was near Jedediah's age, still handsome, with an air of refined sadness. "Jedediah," she said warmly, pointedly ignoring Clara. "How wonderful to see you in church again. It's been too long. Catherine." Jedediah's greeting was polite but reserved. "This is Clara Bennett, my intended—" "Mrs." Hartley's gaze flicked over Clara dismissively. "Yes, I heard about your arrangement." She turned back to Jedediah, laying a gloved hand on his arm. "I do hope you know what you're doing. Martha would want you to be happy, of course, but she'd also want you to be wise." The implication was clear. Marrying Clara was anything but wise. "I appreciate your concern," Jedediah said, his voice cooling several degrees. "But I'm capable of making my own decisions." He guided Clara away, but she felt Mrs. Hartley's stare burning into her back. More whispers followed them to the wagon. "That's Catherine Hartley," an older woman explained to her companion. "She's been hoping to catch Jedediah since her own husband died 2 years ago. Must be quite a shock to be passed over for a snippet of a girl." The ride home was silent. Clara stared at her clasped hands, shame and anger warring in her chest. Finally, she couldn't contain it anymore. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is improper. You could marry someone like Mrs. Hartley, someone your own age, who knew Martha, who— "Stop." Jedediah's voice was firm. "Catherine Hartley is a gossiping busybody who thinks knowing Martha gives her claim to manage my life. I didn't choose her. I chose you. But you didn't really choose me," Clara said miserably. "You chose the woman in the letters, the 25-year-old experienced housekeeper who doesn't exist." Jedediah pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. "You think I can't count? You think I believed for 1 minute you were 25? Clara stared at him, shocked. "I've lived long enough to know the difference between a woman of 25 and a girl trying to act older than her years." He continued, "Your letters were careful, but your handwriting gave you away. Too careful, too practiced, like someone trying very hard to appear mature. Then why? Because the trying mattered more than the truth." His eyes were kind but serious. "Because I'm not looking for another Martha. She's gone, and any woman I married would drive herself mad trying to fill her shoes. I'm looking for someone willing to build a different life. Someone young enough to adapt, strong enough to endure, honest enough to work despite starting with a lie." Clara felt tears threaten again. "The whole town thinks you're making a foolish mistake." "The town thought I was foolish for staying after Martha died, thought I was foolish for not selling to the cattle company. I've never much cared what the town thinks." He gathered the reins again. "Question is, do you care more about their opinions or about making a life that works?" That evening, Clara made her best meal yet. Roasted chicken that was actually moist, potatoes that weren't lumpy, even a passable pie with preserved peaches. She was bringing coffee to the porch where Jedediah and Samuel sat when she heard them talking. "Town's buzzing like a kicked hive," Samuel was saying. "Bunch of harpies with nothing better to do than peck at other folks' business. Let them buzz." Jedediah replied, "Clara held up well today. She's tougher than she looks." Samuel admitted, "Still young. Though, you prepared for what people will say?" "People will always say something. If not her age, then something else. Martha was too educated. They said, Too refined for ranch life, didn't stop us from building a good life together. Samuel grunted agreement. True enough. And the girl, Clara, she's got spine. Saw her face down that Morrison woman's needling without flinching. Much. Clara retreated silently, warmed by their defense despite the criticism that prompted it. She thought about Jedediah's words, about choosing to build a life rather than fill another woman's space. Maybe that's what she needed to do. Stop trying to be the accomplished 25-year-old from her letters and start being Clara, whatever that meant, that night. She wrote in the journal she'd started keeping, "The town may see a child bride, but I am beginning to see something else. I see a chance to become someone new, someone shaped by this hard land and these quiet men who judge by actions more than words. Let them whisper. Let them compare me to Martha and find me wanting. I will learn, grow, and prove myself not to them but to the land itself, to the work that needs doing, to the man who saw through my lies and chose me anyway. Tomorrow I will hold my head high in town. I will smile at their barbs and return kindness for their cuts. And I will continue becoming whoever I am meant to be in this place that is starting, slowly, to feel like home." The moon rose full over the ranch, and somewhere in the house, she could hear Jedediah's steady footsteps as he made his nightly rounds. The sound was becoming as familiar as her own heartbeat, as comforting as morning coffee. Whatever the town thought, whatever challenges lay ahead, she was beginning to believe she might actually belong here after all. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, innocent as a rattlesnake before it strikes. Clara was kneading bread dough, a skill she'd finally mastered after weeks of producing bricks, when Samuel brought in the mail from town. "Something here for you," he said. His weathered face creased with curiosity. Letters for Clara were rare. All her correspondence since arriving had been from Jedediah before she'd made the journey west. Clara wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and took the envelope. Her heart stuttered when she saw the return address, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The handwriting was familiar. Mrs. Whitmore, her mother's oldest friend. The woman who'd tried to shelter Clara after her parents died. "Everything all right?" Samuel asked, noting her sudden pallor. "Yes, just news from home." Clara tucked the letter into her apron pocket. "I'll read it later." But later never came. The letter burned against her hip all through the day's chores. She could feel its weight as she fed the chickens, a task she'd finally mastered without bloodshed. It pressed against her as she bent to tend the small garden she'd started, coaxing life from the hard Texas soil. By evening, her nerves were strung tight as fence wire. She waited until after supper, when Jedediah was reviewing the ledgers and Samuel had retired to the bunkhouse. In the privacy of her room, Clara lit the lamp with trembling fingers and opened the letter. "Dear Clara, I pray this letter finds you well and settled in your new situation. I write with a heavy heart to inform you that Robert Colson has been making inquiries about your whereabouts. He seems quite determined to find you, claiming you broke a promise of marriage. I have told him nothing, of course, but others in town may not be so discreet. I am concerned, my dear, about the circumstances of your departure. While I understand your reluctance regarding Mr. Colson, I fear you may not have been entirely truthful with your new intended about your age. You are, after all, only 19. Though I recall you mentioning in your hasty goodbye that you had claimed to be older, please write soon to assure me of your welfare. And Clara, dear child, I urge you to be honest with Mr. Brooks. Marriages built on deception rarely prosper. Your loving friend, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore." Clara read the letter 3 times, each word driving the spike of fear deeper. Robert Colson, the drunkard her neighbors had tried to force upon her, and Mrs. Whitmore, sweet, well-meaning Mrs. Whitmore, had put her deception in writing. If this letter had been seen by anyone else, she burned the letter immediately, watching the paper curl and blacken in the wash basin. But destroying the evidence didn't destroy the truth it contained. Somewhere in Louisiana, Robert Colson was looking for her. And here in Texas, She was living a lie that grew heavier each day. The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety. Clara jumped at every sound, expecting Jedediah to confront her with knowledge of her deception. But he seemed unchanged, still patient in his instruction, still quietly approving of her improvements. "You're getting to be a fair hand at ranching," he told her one evening as they worked on the account books together. "Wouldn't have believed it that first week, when you were afraid of your own shadow." "I had a good teacher," Clara murmured, guilt twisting in her stomach. How could he be so kind when she was deceiving him so thoroughly? The breaking point came unexpectedly. A week after the letter's arrival, they'd ridden out together to check the fence line, Clara finally comfortable enough on horseback to make the journey. The day was perfect. Autumn crisp, with a blue sky that seemed to stretch forever. They'd worked in companionable silence, mending breaks in the fence, sharing water from the same canteen. As the sun began its descent, they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek. Jedediah had just shown her how to read the signs of coming weather in the cloud formations when he mentioned, almost casually, "Circuit preacher will be here next week. Still willing to go through with this?" The question, so simple, so direct, shattered something inside Clara. The weight of her deceptions, the fear of discovery, the growing affection she felt for this honest man she was lying to, it all came crashing down at once. "I can't," she whispered, then louder. "I can't do this." Jedediah went very still. "Can't marry me? Can't keep lying to you?" The words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. "I'm not 25, I'm 19. I lied in my letters because I was desperate, because no one would consider a 19-year-old girl for marriage, because I had nowhere else to go." She was crying now, hot tears streaming down her face. "There was a man in Louisiana, Robert Colson, a drunk who wanted to marry me after my parents died. Everyone said I should be grateful for the offer, that a girl alone had no choices. So I ran. I lied about my age and I ran, and I've been lying to you ever since." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara couldn't bear to look at Jedediah's face, to see the disappointment and anger she knew must be there. She stared at her hands, clenched in her lap, waiting for the condemnation she deserved. 19, he said finally, his voice flat and unreadable. "Yes. And this Colson, he's looking for you. I received a letter, a warning from a friend. He's making inquiries." Clara forced herself to look up, to meet whatever judgment awaited. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll leave tomorrow. I'll find somewhere." "Quiet." The single word stopped her spiral of self-recrimination. Jedediah's face was closed, hard as granite in the fading light. He stood abruptly, walking to the edge of the creek, his back to her. "I told you once I hated lies," he said, still facing away. "My foreman before Samuel stole from me. Smiled to my face every day while selling my cattle to line his own pockets. Cost me a season's profit and nearly the ranch." Clara's heart sank further. Of course he would hate her now. How could he not? "Martha never lied to me," he continued. 20 years of marriage, and she never once deceived me about anything that mattered. I thought that kind of honesty was what I needed in a wife again." He turned then, and Clara was shocked to see not anger, but something deeper and more complex in his expression. "But Martha also never faced what you faced, never had to make the choices you made. She came from a good family, had options, security. You had a drunk trying to claim you and no one to protect you. That doesn't excuse." "No, it doesn't." His voice was firm. "But it explains." He walked back to where she sat, standing over her with those piercing eyes. 19. Lord help me, you're younger than I even guessed, and I'm old enough to be your father. Age is just numbers." Clara said desperately. "You said that yourself, about the work mattering more than—" "I know what I said." He sat down heavily beside her, suddenly looking every one of his 42 years. "Question is, what do we do now?" They sat in silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. The creek babbled peacefully, unaware of the human drama playing out on its banks. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice small but determined. "I'll leave if you want me to. But I don't want to go. These weeks here, they've been the first time since my parents died that I've felt safe, useful, like I could belong somewhere. She took a shaky breath. I know I started with lies, but everything else, the work, the learning, the trying, that's all been real. Jedediah picked up a stone, turning it over in his hands. You've worked hard. Can't deny that. And you're right, the work has been honest even if the words weren't. I'll understand if you can't forgive. I didn't say that. He threw the stone into the creek, watching the ripples spread. But I need time to think. Need to figure out what's right here, a 19-year-old girl. He shook his head. Town's already talking. This would give them enough ammunition to talk until kingdom come. I don't care what they say. You should. You're young enough that reputation matters. Young enough that you could find someone else. Someone closer to your own age. Build a normal life. I don't want normal, Clara said fiercely. I want this ranch, this life. You and Samuel and even those terrible chickens. I want to wake up to that rooster and know I have work to do that matters. I want to learn to be useful, to be needed. I want... She stopped, afraid she'd said too much. Stay the night, Jedediah said finally. Tomorrow. We'll decide. But tonight, stay. They rode back to the ranch in the deepening twilight. Silence heavy between them. Clara felt exposed, raw, as if her confession had stripped away a protective layer of skin. But beneath the fear and shame, she felt something else, a strange relief. The truth was out. Whatever came next, at least the lies were done. That night, she barely slept, straining to hear any sound that might indicate Jedediah's decision. Would he ask her to leave at first light? Would he send her back to Louisiana, to Robert Colson and a fate worse than deception? The moon traced its path across her window, and still she lay awake, caught between hope and dread, between the girl she'd been and the woman she was still trying to become. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight, all she had were questions and the memory of Jedediah's face by the creek. Surprised, disappointed, but not entirely without compassion. Whatever morning brought, at least she would face it with truth instead of lies. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Dawn came like a judgment, painting the sky the color of old blood. Clara had given up on sleep somewhere around 3 a.m, instead sitting by her window watching the stars fade into the approaching day. Her carpetbag sat packed by the door, ready for the dismissal she expected. The house was quieter than usual. No sound of Jedediah's boots on the stairs. No smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. Clara dressed with trembling fingers, pinning her hair with extra care as if neatness might somehow mitigate her sins. When she finally descended to the kitchen, she found Samuel alone, making coffee with his usual morning scowl. "Where's—" she began. "Out," Samuel said shortly. "Been out since before dawn." Clara's heart sank. He couldn't even bear to be in the house with her. She moved mechanically through the morning routine, lighting the stove, mixing biscuit dough, slicing bacon. Her hands knew the work now, even as her mind spiraled through possibilities. Would he send her back to Louisiana? Simply put her on a train with nothing? "Girl," Samuel's gruff voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're about to knead those biscuits into boot leather." Clara looked down at the overworked dough. "Sorry, Sit down." It was so unexpected that Clara simply obeyed, sinking into a kitchen chair. Samuel poured 2 cups of coffee, setting one before her with surprising gentleness. "Jed told me," he said without preamble, "about your age, about the lies." Clara stared into her coffee, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry. I know I've brought dishonor to this house." "Dishonor?" Samuel snorted. "Girl, you don't know the first thing about dishonor. You ever steal from a man who trusted you? Ever sell out your friends for silver? Ever abandon a child because raising it was inconvenient?" Clara looked up, startled by the vehemence in his voice. "That's dishonor." Samuel continued. "What you did, that's just being young and scared and backed into a corner. Not saying it was right, but I understand it." "Jedediah hates lies," Clara whispered. "That he does. Has good reason to—" Samuel leaned back, studying her with those sharp old eyes. But he also knows something about being trapped by circumstances. You think he wanted to come out here, middle of nowhere? He was a school teacher once, back in Ohio, came west because his brother died and left him this land, and Martha needed the dry air for her lungs. This was more than Samuel had ever shared about their past. Clara held her breath, afraid to interrupt. "Point is," Samuel said, "we all make choices we wouldn't make if we had better options. Question is what we do after." The sound of horses' hooves interrupted whatever else he might have said. Through the window, Clara could see Jedediah dismounting, his face set in hard lines. He entered through the back door, bringing the scent of grass and morning air. His gaze found Clara immediately, then shifted to Samuel. "You tell her. Just having coffee," Samuel said mildly. "Biscuits'll burn if someone doesn't tend them." It was a dismissal. Samuel stomped out, leaving Clara and Jedediah alone in the kitchen that had become so familiar. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I've been writing," Jedediah said finally. "Thinking?" Clara waited, her hands clenched in her lap. 19. He shook his head. "When I was 19, I was still reading poetry and dreaming about seeing the ocean. Biggest worry I had was passing my Latin examination." "I wish I could have had such worries," Clara said softly. "I know." He moved to the window, staring out at the land he'd worked for 20 years. "That's what I keep coming back to. You did what you had to do to survive. Can't fault a person for that." Hope fluttered in Clara's chest. "Does that mean—" "It means I need you to understand something." He turned to face her, his expression grave. "I can forgive the lies about your age. What I struggle with is the trust. Marriage is hard enough without wondering what else might be hidden." "There's nothing else," Clara said quickly. "I swear. The only lie was my age. Everything else, my parents' death, having nowhere to go. Even that awful Robert Colson. It's all true. And if this Colson comes looking, if he tracks you here, then I'll face him." Clara lifted her chin. "I'm not the same frightened girl who ran from Louisiana. These weeks here, they've changed me. I've learned I'm stronger than I knew." Something shifted in Jedediah's expression. "You have gotten stronger. Saw it yesterday when you helped with that fence. Saw it last week when you faced down that bull that got loose." "I was terrified of that bull," Clara admitted. "But you stood your ground. That's what courage is, being scared and standing anyway." He moved closer. Close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines carved by sun and sorrow around his eyes. "Question is, can you stand with me? Knowing the town will talk worse than ever? Knowing I'm old enough to be your father? Knowing this life will never be easy?" Clara rose from her chair, meeting his gaze steadily. "I've already stood with you. Every day I've been here. I've chosen this. Not because I had no other choice. I could have kept running, found another town, another lie. I stayed because this felt right, because you and Samuel treated me like a person, not a possession, because I could see myself building a life here, even with an old man. You're not old, you're seasoned." Clara managed a small smile. "Like the cast iron skillet, better for the years of use." That drew an unexpected sound from him, almost a laugh. "Comparing me to cookware now? It's a compliment. That skillet is the most reliable thing in the kitchen." Clara sobered. "I know I hurt you with my deception. I know trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, but if you'll let me try, the preacher comes in 3 days." Jedediah interrupted. Clara's breath caught. "Does that mean—" "It means we have 3 days to decide." His voice was carefully neutral. 3 days for you to be certain this is what you want. 3 days for me to reconcile with marrying a girl young enough to be my daughter. 3 days for us both to choose with clear eyes. "I've already chosen," Clara said. "You've chosen escape, safety, survival." His eyes were intent on hers. "That's not the same as choosing a life, choosing a person. I won't have you coming to resent me in 5 years, 10 years, when you realize what you've bound yourself to. And I won't have you thinking you're some sort of last resort." Clara shot back. surprising them both with her vehemence. Yes, I was desperate when I wrote those letters, but I'm not desperate now. I have skills now. I could find work in town, save money, make my own way. I don't need to marry you. Jedediah Brooks. I want to... The words hung in the air between them. More honest than anything she'd said since stepping off that train. Jedediah's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, uncertainty, something that might have been hope. 3 days, he said again, but his voice was gentler now. We both think on it for 3 days. And Clara, no more lies between us, not ever. If we do this, we do it with truth, however hard that might be. No more lies. Clara agreed solemnly. I promise. He nodded, then seemed to remember something. That letter you burned, I saw the ashes in your wash basin. Was it about Coulson? Clara flushed. Even now, the instinct to hide, to protect herself with deception, was strong, but she'd promised truth. Yes, a friend warning me he's looking for me. If he comes here, he'll find you're under my protection. Legal protection, if you accept it. The implication was clear. Marriage would shield her from any claim Coulson might make. That can't be the reason, Clara said. I won't have you marrying me out of pity or protection. And I won't have you marrying me out of gratitude or fear. Jedediah moved toward the door, then paused. 3 days. Clara, think hard. Choose well. Whatever you decide, you'll have to live with it for a long time. He left her standing in the kitchen, surrounded by the morning tasks that had become routine. Clara looked at the biscuit dough, still waiting to be finished. Life went on. Even in the midst of emotional upheaval, there was work to be done. She rolled out the dough with steady hands, cut circles with the flour-dusted glass, laid them on the pan with proper spacing. 3 days to decide her future. 3 days to prove she could choose this life not from desperation, but from desire. Outside, she could hear Jedediah and Samuel talking by the barn, their voices too low to make out words. Planning the day's work, no doubt. Life on a ranch didn't pause for personal drama. Clara slid the biscuits into the oven, then began slicing bacon. 3 days. She'd use them to show Jedediah and herself that she belonged here not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was where she wanted to be. The morning sun climbed higher, flooding the kitchen with light. Somewhere a meadowlark sang, its voice bright with promise. Clara found herself humming as she worked, an old hymn her mother used to sing. The house around her felt solid, real, worth fighting for. 3 days to make the most important choice of her life. Clara intended to make them count. The morning of the first day dawned cold and clear. Clara found Jedediah at the breakfast table, studying a list of tasks that needed completing before winter. He looked up as she entered, something assessing in his gaze. Fence posts arrived yesterday, he said without preamble. Need to get the south pasture secured before we move the cattle. You ever set a fence post? No, Clara admitted, setting down his coffee. But I can learn. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Get your work clothes. Meet me at the barn. What followed was the hardest physical labor Clara had ever attempted. Setting fence posts meant digging holes in the hard-packed earth, each one 2 feet deep. The post-hole digger was heavy and awkward, biting into soil that seemed determined to resist. Within an hour, her hands were screaming despite the gloves Jedediah had given her. Take a break, he said, noting her struggle. No. Clara gritted her teeth and continued digging. I can finish this. They worked side by side through the morning, Jedediah digging 2 holes for every one of hers, but never commenting on the difference. When they finally stopped for water and cold biscuits at midday, Clara's entire body ached. Why are you doing this? She asked, flexing her sore fingers. This isn't women's work. Nothing on a ranch is men's or women's work. Jedediah replied, It's just work that needs doing. Martha helped me set every fence post on the original property line. Took us 3 months, working evenings after the regular chores. Clara looked at her blistered palms, imagining the refined Martha from the daguerreotype wielding a post-hole digger. I wouldn't have thought that a lady would do such work. Jedediah shook his head. Martha understood something it took me years to learn. A ranch partnership means both people doing whatever needs doing. Can't have one person sitting pretty while the other breaks their back. They returned to work, and Clara found a rhythm. Dig, lift, clear, dig again. When a post was finally set and tamped solid, she felt a surge of accomplishment, entirely different from mastering a recipe or balancing the ledgers. This was creation, building something that would stand for years. By evening, they'd set 12 posts. Clara's hands were raw despite the gloves. Her back screamed, and she could barely lift her arms. But looking at the straight line of posts marching across the pasture, she felt proud. "Tomorrow we'll string wire," Jedediah said as they walked back to the house. "That's easier but requires precision. One loose strand and the cattle will find it." At dinner, Samuel noticed Clara's careful movements. "Girl looks like she's been wrestling bears." "Fence posts," Clara said, trying not to wince as she reached for the salt. Samuel's eyebrows rose. "Jed had you setting posts." "I asked to learn everything about running the ranch," Clara said firmly. "Everything means everything." That night, she soaked her hands in warm water and salt, hissing at the sting. Through her window, she could see lamplight in the barn where Jedediah was checking on a cow close to calving. Even after a day of hard labor, the work never stopped. The second day brought new challenges. Stringing barbed wire required different skills: steady hands, careful measurement, and constant vigilance against the sharp barbs that seemed determined to catch clothing and skin. Clara tore her sleeve within the first hour and bloodied her forearm not long after. "Wire's got a mind of its own," Jedediah observed, showing her how to use the wire stretcher. "Respect it, but don't fear it." They worked mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet. Clara found herself stealing glances at Jedediah as he worked. Despite his age, he moved with economical grace, every motion purposeful. His hands were gentle with the wire despite their strength, and he hummed sometimes, old hymns and folk songs she didn't recognize. "Tell me about Ohio," she said during a water break. He looked surprised. "Not much to tell. Small town. My father was a minister. Wanted me to follow in his footsteps. But you became a teacher instead. Compromise. He wanted me preaching from a pulpit. I preferred teaching from a desk." A distant look crossed his face. "Had 23 students my last year. Youngest was 6, oldest 17. Taught them all in one room. Do you miss it?" "Sometimes. Missed the books most. Had to sell most of them when we came west. Too heavy for the wagon." He gestured at the vast landscape around them. "But this land teaches different lessons. About endurance, about seasons, about making something from nothing." "And Martha? Did she miss Ohio?" Jedediah's hand stilled on the wire. "Every day. At first, she cried for 3 months straight, though she tried to hide it. But she was stronger than she looked. By the second year, she was the one teaching me about cattle, about weather patterns, about surviving out here." They returned to work, and Clara pondered this image of Martha, not the perfect pioneer woman of town legend, but a frightened city woman who'd learned to adapt. Perhaps there was hope for her too. That evening, exhausted and filthy, Clara found the energy to make one of her best meals yet. The beef was tender, the gravy smooth, the biscuits light, finally, truly light. Samuel actually grunted approval, which from him was like a standing ovation. "You're getting the hang of it," Jedediah said, cleaning his plate. "The cooking or the ranch work?" Clara asked. "Both." After dinner, instead of retreating to the study for bookwork, Jedediah surprised her. "Come outside. Want to show you something?" He led her to a small rise behind the house, where a bench had been placed to overlook the valley. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and purple. In the distance, their new fence posts stood like sentinels. "Martha liked to sit here evenings," he said, settling on the bench. "Said it helped her think." Clara sat beside him. aware of the space between them, close enough to be companionable, far enough to be proper. It's beautiful. It's hard country. Beautiful. Yes, but unforgiving. Drought can ruin you. Storms can wipe out a year's work. Cattle die, crops fail, wells run dry. He turned to look at her. I need you to understand what you're choosing. This life will age you fast. It'll put calluses on your hands and lines on your face. You'll bury cattle and probably children. You'll work from dawn to dark and sometimes through the night. You're trying to scare me away? I'm trying to be honest. You're 19. In town, you could find a shopkeeper's son, have an easier life, regular hours, Sunday socials, maybe even indoor plumbing eventually. Clara held up her blistered hands. Do these look like they belong to a shopkeeper's wife? They look like they belong to a fighter, he said quietly. Question is, what are you fighting for? Clara considered the question, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. When my parents died, I thought my life was over. Everything I'd known, everyone who'd loved me, gone. I was just trying to survive, to get through each day. She paused, searching for the right words. But these weeks here, I haven't just been surviving. I've been building something, learning things I never imagined I could do, becoming someone I didn't know I could be. That's not an answer to my question. Isn't it? Clara turned to face him. I'm fighting for the person this place is making me into, and yes, for this land, this life. For the chance to matter, to be necessary, to wake up knowing there's work that needs my hands to do it. And if I weren't part of the equation, if the ranch was yours free and clear? It was a strange question, but Clara sensed the importance of her answer. Then I'd have to learn to set fence posts alone, wouldn't I? Might take me longer, but I'd manage. She met his gaze steadily. This isn't about needing a man, Jedediah. It's about wanting a partner, someone to share the work and the worry, the sunsets and the storms. They sat in silence as full dark settled around them. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. The night sounds of the ranch rose around them, horses shifting in the barn, the windmill creaking, the endless whisper of grass in the wind. One more day, Jedediah said finally. Tomorrow, I'll show you the hardest parts, the ledgers when we're losing money, the decisions about which cattle to sell when cash is tight, what it's like when the well pump breaks in January. He stood, offering her a hand up. Then you'll decide. Walking back to the house, Clara felt the weight of the coming decision. But beneath her exhaustion, beneath the ache in her muscles and the sting of her blistered hands, she felt something else, certainty, growing like a seed in good soil. This was where she belonged. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because nowhere else called to her like this land, this life, this chance to become who she was meant to be. One more day to prove it, to him and to herself. The circuit preacher arrived on a Thursday morning, his wagon dusty from the long ride between settlements. Reverend Dawson was the same silver-haired man who'd presided over Clara's uncomfortable Sunday in church. But his eyes were kind as he greeted them at the door. Jedediah, Miss Bennett, he said warmly. I understand there's to be a wedding. Perhaps, Jedediah said carefully. We have some matters to discuss first. They gathered in the parlor. Clara perched on the edge of her chair, hands folded to hide their trembling. The past 3 days had tested her in every way possible, but she'd met each challenge. Now came the final test, not of her body, but of her heart. Clara has something she needs to tell you, Jedediah said, his voice neutral. Clara lifted her chin, meeting the Reverend's gentle gaze. I deceived Mr. Brooks in my letters. I'm not 25 years old. I'm 19. Reverend Dawson's eyebrows rose, but his expression remained compassionate. I see. And you've told Jedediah the truth? Yes, 3 days ago. And what do you think of this deception? Jedediah? The Reverend asked. Jedediah leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. I think desperate people make desperate choices. I think a 19-year-old girl alone in the world has fewer options than she should. And I think... He paused, glancing at Clara. I think character shows itself in actions more than years. You've had time to consider this, both of you? 3 days. Clara said, Mr. Brooks tested me, showed me the hardest parts of ranch life. I set fence posts until my hands bled, strung barbed wire, learned what it means when cattle prices drop and wells run dry. He wanted me to choose with clear eyes. And what is your choice? Clara turned to face Jedediah directly. I choose this life. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I choose the hard work and the long days, the uncertain weather and the stubborn cattle. I choose to build something lasting on this land. She took a breath, gathering courage. And I choose you, Jedediah Brooks, not as a protector or a last resort, but as a partner, someone I respect and am coming to care for. The room fell silent. Jedediah's face was unreadable, his pale eyes fixed on Clara's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I spent 20 years with Martha. Good years, mostly. When she died, I thought that was the end of it. Figured I'd grow old alone, work this land until it killed me or I got too old to manage. He stood, pacing to the window. Then this girl shows up, scared as a rabbit but trying to pretend otherwise. Couldn't cook worth a damn, afraid of her own shadow, clearly lying about her age. Clara's heart sank, but Jedediah wasn't finished. But she worked, Lord, how she worked. Every mistake. She learned from every challenge she faced, got thrown from a horse and climbed right back on. Burned enough biscuits to build a house, then learned to make them light as clouds. He turned back to face them, 19 years old, and she's got more grit than men twice her age. Jedediah, Reverend Dawson said gently. The town will talk. The age difference. Let them talk. Jedediah's voice was firm. They talked when Martha and I came here. Said a schoolteacher couldn't make it as a rancher. Said Martha was too delicate for frontier life. We proved them wrong then. We'll prove them wrong now. He crossed to Clara, standing before her chair. I'm 23 years older than you. I'm set in my ways. I'll never be romantic or fancy. This ranch is my life, and it's not an easy life. But if you're willing, I'm offering to share it with you. Not as a mail-order arrangement anymore, but as a true partnership, equal in all things. Clara stood, her heart pounding. I'm willing. Then I have one more thing to say. Jedediah's eyes softened. Love doesn't count years. Clara, it counts trust and work and showing up every day even when it's hard. It counts the small moments, sharing coffee at dawn, working side by side, sitting on a bench watching the sunset. We've had a rough start with the lies between us, but I believe we can build something true from here. Tears blurred Clara's vision. Love doesn't count years, she repeated softly. I want to build that something true with you. Reverend Dawson cleared his throat. Well then, shall we proceed? The ceremony was simple, held right there in the parlor with Samuel as witness. The Reverend's words washed over Clara like a benediction, promises of fidelity, partnership, endurance through good times and bad. When he asked if she took Jedediah as her husband, her "I do" rang clear and certain. Jedediah's hands were steady as he slipped a plain gold band on her finger, Martha's ring. She realized, resized for her smaller hand, not an erasure of the past, but an acknowledgement of continuity, of life going forward. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Dawson said with a smile. The kiss was brief, almost formal, but Jedediah's hands were gentle as they cupped her face. No more lies between us, he murmured. Ever. No more lies, Clara promised. After the Reverend left and Samuel had gruffly congratulated them, Clara found herself alone with her husband. The word felt strange in her mind. Husband. This man who'd been a stranger mere weeks ago, who'd seen through her deceptions but chosen her anyway. I have something for you, Jedediah said, leading her to the study. From the desk drawer, he pulled out a small wrapped package. Wedding gift. Clara unwrapped it carefully, gasping when she revealed a leather-bound journal, its pages clean and waiting. It's beautiful. Thought you might like to record things, the ranch records. Yes, but also your thoughts, your journey. He looked almost embarrassed. "Martha kept journals. Have a whole shelf of them upstairs. Thought maybe you'd like to start your own story." Clara clutched the journal to her chest, overwhelmed. It was such a simple gift, but it spoke volumes. Acceptance of her as she was, belief in her future, space for her own voice in this house that had known another woman's presence for so long. That evening, they held a small celebration dinner. Samuel had mysteriously produced a cake from somewhere, and even more mysteriously, it was delicious. They ate in the dining room instead of the kitchen, using the good plates. To new beginnings. Samuel raised his coffee cup in a toast. To partnership, Jedediah added. To home. Clara finished, later, as night settled over the ranch. Clara stood on the porch looking out at the land that was now hers too. Jedediah joined her, standing close but not touching. "Scared?" he asked. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "But also, ready? Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He was quiet for a moment. "I won't rush you. We'll take things slow. Build our partnership day by day. You've got your own room still, until you're ready for more." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but appreciated his consideration. They were married-in-law now, but in many ways still strangers. Time would bridge that gap. She believed. Time and work and truth. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing past my lies, for giving me a chance." "Thank you," he replied, "for being brave enough to try, for choosing this life even after seeing its harsh edges." A coyote howled in the distance, that wild sound that had once frightened her but now seemed like a familiar voice. The stars spread above them in a glittering canopy, and the endless grass whispered secrets in the wind. "Mrs. Brooks," Jedediah said, testing the words. "Clara Brooks. Has a nice sound." "It does," Clara agreed, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. They stood together as the night deepened. Two people who'd found each other through deception but chosen each other in truth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The reactions of the town, the reality of married life, the endless demands of the ranch. But tonight, they had this moment of peace, this promise of partnership, this hope for a future built on honest ground. In her pocket, Clara felt the weight of the journal, waiting for her to fill its pages. She thought she might start tonight, recording this day when Clara Bennett became Clara Brooks, when a scared 19-year-old girl stopped running and started building, when a lonely rancher opened his heart again, when love proved it truly doesn't count years, only courage, commitment, and the willingness to choose each other despite imperfect beginnings. The Double B Ranch settled into sleep around them, and Clara Brooks stepped into her new life with clear eyes and steady hands, ready for whatever came next. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while doing chores like Clara learned to do? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to us, and I can't wait to hear what you think of Clara and Jedediah's journey.